you can picture him in the huddle, talking to all these defensive guys, screaming and yelling. Him go, "Parlez-vous français?"
You ever play with a foreign player, Tommy? Well, outside of a kicker, of course, right?
Yeah. Just the kicker.
Just the kicker.
Nobody down in the dirt.
The Orange Crush didn't have any guys from Marseille in France or anything like that.
I don't even think we went east of the Mississippi for ball players. We just kind of searched the mountains for guys.
All right, we're going to go to a break here and check out some of the schools who have had some players chosen. Remember, Florida had 3 in the first round. We'll be back. The fun continues in a moment.
Parlez-vous français?
It's for you.
You got the best for you. Back at New York, we are midway through the 3rd round in the draft, and we began the day talking about the possibility of Jim McMahon leaving Chicago, going to San Diego. That didn't happen. So does Jim McMahon definitely stay with the Bears? Pete Axtell out at Bear headquarters at Lake Forest, Illinois, says what, are they still trying to trade him away? It's been all day, hasn't it, Ax?
Well, Chris, with my incredible nose for news, I've managed to be on the biggest non-story of draft day. I have to piece together what happened here. San Diego, as I reported at the top of the show 100 hours ago, whenever that was, really hoped to get into that 3-way deal that sent Riggs to the Redskins, and they wanted to get Stan Humphries, the Redskins' backup quarterback. When that fell through, they traded up to get Bobby Joe Tolliver, who they obviously rate a lot higher than Mel Kiper does. And we'll see who turns out right in that dispute. And they said, in their words, they were hedging their bets with McMahon. He was their 3rd option, and they decided not to use that option. In fact, another source unrelated to the Chargers made the comment to me around the league today, said, Mike Ditka told you earlier we wouldn't give up the whole orchard for one tree. He says, by the time they really unload Jim McMahon, they may be giving up just an apple. And now, back to the Big Apple.
All right, Ax, thank you, as long as it's not a rotten apple, and that will be for some teams to determine. We have seen a day in which the biggest news involved the trade of a couple existing for the non-trade of McMahon, the trade of Gerald Riggs going from Atlanta to the Redskins. We've seen 2 teams, the Redskins and the Cleveland Browns, both unload #1 picks next year in the 1990. The Redskins in the Gerald Riggs deal with Atlanta. The Cleveland Browns in the deal that enabled them to draft Lloyd Tillman very early in the 2nd round, an impact player for them. We have seen a couple of other trades and swapping of some positions. We've seen Dallas' 2nd round pick become a Raider, Steve Wisniewski. But, you know, so it has been a day full of some surprises, a day where some teams made some moves like the Jets. Of course, when the Jets or the Giants make some interesting moves, you hear them all over the place, and people are wondering about the Jets move. Time will tell. It was a day in which the top of the draft, you pretty much knew what was going to happen, in which the Blue Chippers went where we thought, Mandarich to Green Bay and Barry Sanders to Detroit, Derrick Thomas to Kansas City, and Deion Sanders, prime time, if you will. So, of course, we'll have to feature him on our show every year, every week, I should say. He went to Atlanta. And then, as expected, Broderick Thomas went to Tampa Bay. Some surprises like Andre Rison falling all the way down in the 1st round, as far down as Indianapolis, who may have gotten themselves a steal. Some surprises like Louis Oliver, the safety, falling all the way down to the late 1st round, in which Miami made a deal with the Bears to get him. Miami took a chance to go with Sammy Smith. I would say that is some interesting news as well. And San Diego did not make that deal to give away their 8th overall pick, going instead for Margot Adams' stepbrother, Bert Grossman, the defensive end from Pittsburgh. See, we worked Margot into the show twice. We're midway through the 3rd round. They go 12 rounds in all, 335 picks. Draft will start no round past 9 o'clock tonight, and then they'll pick up tomorrow morning and finish it off. And the 1989 NFL Draft will be history. We promised you before that we would take a look at where certain schools, how they have fared in the draft wars, if you will. We're going to try it again and take a look. We'll be back. There it is.
7 Eastern Time. Then we'll be right back in Sports Center again to put a little perspective on this draft. The draft that really may mark in many respects as we recap what we've seen so far today. Draft that may recap the beginning of a new era in the National Football League. And the first pick of this draft way back when belonged to the Dallas Cowboys at noon Eastern Time today. Troy Aikman, the selection, of course, he'd already signed a 6-year, $11 and change million contract that included a $2 million plus signing bonus. New ownership, Jerry Jones, new coach. But yesterday in Dallas, about 100,000 people lined the streets on Tom Landry Day. Day of a lot of emotion, a day of heartfelt thanks to this man, what he has meant as the only coach until now since 1960. Few dry eyes.
It's been the best at what he's done. He's the best coach in the National Football League and a pretty darn good guy.
Great pleasure for me to be here today. And I'm especially thankful for all the wonderful people who made this day probably the most exciting and the most meaningful day of my life.
As Tom Landry said yesterday, I'll never be in another parade. He says, I'll never have another press conference, but if I see you on the street, I'll stop and say hi, which summarizes that, gentlemen. Let's get back to where we stand with one of the local teams, the Jets. All right, you've had your pointed opinions about rounds 1 and 2. All fair enough. Up they come in round 3 with the 70th selection, 14th selection in the 3rd round. Joe Mott, linebacker, Iowa. Let's do this in stages now. You know what we're about to do. Give me your opinion on the pick.
Well, Joe Mott was, I thought, would be about a 6th, 7th, 8th round pick. You had a decent career at Iowa, productive player, but not a kind of athlete that you look for in the 3rd round. And I think that if you look at all the selections of the Jets, everyone was a reach. Lageman, a 1-round reach. And you go to the 2nd round with Bird, a 3-round reach, and this one was at least a 3- or 4-round reach. So the value's just not there for the Jets. They got some defensive players, but I don't think they helped themselves, and I think they passed up too much quality, and obviously could have really enhanced their club if they would have made wise choices in these first 3 rounds.
And then prior to that selection, several of the local beat writers for the Jets came over to our set during the commercial break. They had spoken to Mike Hickey, and as I recall it, this is the quote ascribed to Mike Hickey, having watched today's coverage. He says, he'd like to match up with you head up in the NFL because you do it in your basement, end quote. And that's the quote we've heard. Now, I'll ascribe it 2nd and 3rd hand.
Well, I look forward to the opportunity to going head-to-head with anybody, including Mike Hickey. Mike, I had a lot of respect for. He's done a good job over the years, but you have to call him as you see him. Yeah. Everybody has an opinion, and my opinion is that the first 3 choices for the Jets just didn't make any sense to me. Obviously, to him, he's not making choices to go against the grain. He obviously had these guys rated highly, and hopefully they'll pan out for the Jets. I'm just giving my opinion, and my opinion is that these were reaches, and there were better players on the board that could have done a much better job with the New York Jet organization.
Draft day is opinion day, and you're of the opinion we've got 3 good ball carriers still available, and we've got a quarterback that had been talked about in terms of being a first-rounder, Rodney Peete, still available.
He is, and if you look at Keith Henderson, when you're talking about Keith Henderson, a guy could have been a first, and you have a Robert Drummond still there. There's a lot of quality still on the board at this point in the draft, and they said it was a weak draft, not deep at certain positions. It turned out to be very strong, and there's going to be real good players in the middle rounds, and certainly some good players late rounds that can help you.
It's, as we said, the 1st and 2nd round, what we call the blue chip picks, the premium picks by which at a first glance you can really judge a draft. Yeah, that's important. It's going to be several years down the road. You look at Pro Bowls that are not necessarily studded with free agents, but yeah, you'd get free agent Pro Bowlers. Through the 1980s, statistically, though, you have as good a chance of playing in the Pro Bowl as a free agent than as you do being a 3rd-round selection. I don't know if you knew that, but I mean the drop-off from rounds 2 to 3 as far as getting to the Pro Bowl, and I guess the Pro Bowl being the end of the season, this being the first day of the season, is the yardstick by which you've got to judge your draft selections.
And I think if you look at the 2nd and 3rd rounds of this draft, you'll see more surprises and more guys that were projected in the middle rounds, which means that all those guys that we're looking at as 2nd and 3rds are now still there. And that's why the draft, when you have an opinion, all 28 teams evaluate differently. And every team is going to come up with guys that they have rated much higher on their board at the point in which they're selected. That's why I keep talking about when you buy in the NFL draft is just as important as who you select. A guy can be a great pick in round 3. It could be a major bust or a major reach in round 1. It's all depending upon what round he's taken based on what kind of player he is.
Just for the record, you don't do it in your basement, do you? You've got an office, right?
We have an office, and I'm out there. I try to do it just like the NFL does. So, if Mike wants to take some shots, fine. But these 3 choices, in my estimation,